أشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما رددت لرب العباد. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Thank you for joining us again for another episode of our podcast. And we hope you guys are all well. We're sorry for the long break, but we're back now, and we'll be coming back every 2 weeks, inshallah. Today, our topic is about decision making, and it's something some people may not think very big of it and say, what's so good about it? But we're going to dissect the topic, inshallah. Up until decision making is very important because it can be small things like picking what college you want to go to or what university you go to, all the way up until who you want to exactly get married to, essentially. And inshallah, hopefully this podcast will be able to elaborate on all these kind of things and what it takes to make a good decision and an effective decision. But before all of that, I would like to introduce everybody. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Muhammad Ali. I hope you guys are doing well.
Alhamdulillah, how are you keeping?
Alhamdulillah, trying to adjust to the second lockdown now. But what can we do, hey? But, Sheikh, how are you? You okay? Yeah.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I see you have a nice haircut as well. So. Sheikh, do you want to introduce our topic of the inshallah?
Sure. So as you, Assalamu alaikum everyone. As you rightfully introduced the importance of this topic, effective decision making, sound decision making is of course very, very important. It's crucial. It's common sense, and it's something that Islam has encouraged. And essentially, when we speak about how to make effective decisions, there are two major factors that is often used to make effective decisions. And some of them have been repeated by the scholars. The first is to engage in consultation, to consult people, to consult seniors, to consult, for example, the experts in a particular field. Then obviously the second tool to making sound decisions is performing istikhara. Whereas the first is common sense, something that we all tend to do, whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, regardless of what background you come from. People naturally consult those who are experienced in the field. But the second one is that's something specific only for the Muslims, right? And we'll try to expand on this more in the course of the discussion. So I think what's important is that we try and understand and we begin our discussion as to what is the Islamic importance of consultation.
Yeah, definitely.
Like Hassan kind of rightly introduced, when it comes to decision making, our lives are full of it. If we go back to data, research says that we make as many as 35,000 decisions every single day.
How many?
35,000 decisions.
Wow.
Which is a huge number. And as I'm sure everyone will appreciate, most of those decisions are small, domestic, innocuous. And others are a lot more important, which affect people's lives, livelihoods, and of course, well-being, be it at our private or at professional lives. And I think, again, taking data into consideration and taking research into consideration, making bad decisions, whether it is in your professional or personal life, can have huge impacts. Whilst I was researching a few data, something that kind of comes up at the top of the list is, for example, a lot of people make bad decisions when it comes to careers. For example, more than half of the teachers, according to data, quit their jobs within the first 4 years. In fact, a study that was taken in Philadelphia found that a teacher was almost twice as more likely to drop out of a school than a student.
Wow.
Or, for example, when it comes to jobs, a study shows that when doctors reckon themselves completely certain about a diagnosis, it so happens they were 40% wrong, according to that data. Or, for example, in our personal life, if we take United States, in that data, over 60,000 tattoos were reversed in 2009. Now, obviously, the data is immense, which just shows that people make so many decisions in their life. Some are good, but a lot of them are bad. And the reason why this topic is so important is how can we make use of the tools that we have to make better data. And like Sheikh rightly pointed out, Islamically, there's a lot of benefit, there's a lot of kind of prongs that we can look into it. But the first one is obviously consultation, and thereafter we can start off discussing istikhara.
Yes, definitely. But I mean, at the end of the day, some may argue and turn around to us, look, a decision is not very hard to make. I weigh up the positives, I weigh up the negatives, and I'll decide what I want to do. Why do I need to consult anyone? Why do I need to ask anybody else for their advice? And it's like small, like what you're saying, 35,000 decisions. That's a lot of decisions, and we're not consulting, them 35,000 times to get that one decision. So, what would be the benefit of them?
Yeah, you'd think it's easy as that, isn't it? Just to weigh up the pros and the cons. But unfortunately, you find that many people don't actually weigh up the pros and the cons. People don't actually, think through before making a decision, which is a sad reality in itself because it just goes against the whole procedure of common sense. Whatever decision you make in life, there has to be a thought process that goes into it. Imagine, for example, something is on the line, something of great value. Right, it's a very valuable asset in the line, isn't it? And a tenant, before even acting and putting that on the line, before risking. And it's not just about wealth, it's about everything, your time. I'm sure we've all gone through this where I've come across many people in the community who, they entered university, they began a particular course because they found it very, very interesting, but then later on, usually a few months down the line, they regret it and then they change and they flip-flop from one course to the other, trying to figure out which course is ideal for them. Unfortunately, for some, they end up finishing the course, they graduate from it, and then they end up working in a completely different field.
Sure, yeah.
Which is absolutely different to what they studied and what they studied for the past 3-4 years. What was the issue? What was the problem? I think that generally it goes back to the idea that people didn't pay much attention when making that particular decision. They didn't consult. They did, but they didn't get the right consultation, which is of course very, very important. And we'll try and talk about that in the course of the discussion as well.
Inshallah.
If we kind of stay at the topic of kind of consultation and try and look at it from an Islamic perspective, we realize that this is something that God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has time and time again tried to kind of reinforce that we need to consult with each other. For example, not only us, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked the Prophet himself. If we take Surah Ali Imran, the third chapter, if we look at Ali Imran, verse 159, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks the Holy Prophet to consult. Now that ayat, chapter 3, verse 159, was revealed in the context of the Battle of Uhud. Remember, the people who are burning in the guilt that they had left the Holy Prophet. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that it is because of your mercy that you rejected with them. And as part of the ayat, it says that when you have them take, it says this consult the people and their affairs, you have taken your decision, thereafter put the decision into God. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here, the Prophet is telling him to consult. If we look at historically, before every major battle, he would ask those around him how to kind of go about it. So we have the battle of Badr, the battle of Ta'if, for example. The Prophet asked, should we keep the battle inside the cities or outside the cities? I think the standard example that comes to mind is at the time of the Battle of Husayn, or the Battle of Khandaq, where, just for context, there were around 30,000 people that the Quraysh had gathered together and got kind of nearby tribes, and the whole motive of that was just to annihilate Islam and the Prophet. At that time, the Holy Prophet again got his experts together and consulted. And at that time, it was Salman al-Muhammadi who said that from where I come, we did a trench. So that battle was fought through the trench, a few skirmishes here and there, but the battle was largely fought before it even started. So this is some examples that we can see that even the Holy Prophet in his own life uses consultation.
And no,
Definitely.
it's not the case where the Prophet was in need of their consultation as well, right? The
Hmm.
Prophet used to interact with wahi. Wahi is the greatest form of knowledge that is given to an individual. It's knowledge that permeates, it's penetrates the heart, right? That's the level of the interaction of the Holy Prophet with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when the Quran says to the Prophet that consult with the people, speak to them, see what they have to say, it's not the case where he was in need of that. To try and reinforce the idea that as a community, it is necessary that we
To
rely
ask.
on each other, that
Yeah.
we depend on each other, right? The community, that's how community works essentially, that we, I can rely on you, I depend on you, you depend on me. And that relationship should be reciprocal. The moment I disassociate myself from you and I start feeling that I need to put everything myself, it builds that level of arrogance. And istikhara, the idea of engaging in consultation, it's a very beautiful way of subduing that arrogance. So that's something very important to keep in mind as well when discussing the whole idea of consultation.
Definitely. And following on from that point that you just said, you said about arrogance, I also think a point to mention is also about pride. If the Prophet didn't have a problem asking somebody, look at the status of the Prophet,
Yeah,
yet he still asked other people for
absolutely.
their knowledge. And I think, especially in all types of communities, this is a major problem. Pride. I'm not going to ask someone because I think I'm better than them, or even if I'm wrong, I won't ask them because I don't want them to know about it. There's no harm in asking. If as Muhammad rightly said, in battles, if the Prophet, and a Sheikh said about Wahi coming to him, he could have got the knowledge straight away. It wasn't a question of that. But it's that message that the Prophet is trying to give us, that consult one another. We need you, and we're all as a community. And I think this is something that needs to be looked at more, inshallah.
Ahsan.
Yeah.
So, something important that we need to discuss is, okay, having understood that consultation is necessary, how many people do you consult?
And who do you consult?
And who do you consult, right?
Yeah.
So you have a very important decision to make. It's common sense that you refer to the expert or someone who has experience in that field. Um, you could approach one person, but you could approach three people or four people or five people. So
Yeah, like Sheikh rightly said, when it comes to consultation, you have so many people to choose from. But if you bring it back, there's only so many times in your life that you have to make a big decision. Where, of course, like you said, common sense dictates you look for the experts. But what about our day-to-day aspects? When you go into businesses, you go into meetings. Every time you kind of have a chat with someone, there is some sort of consultation happening. Maybe not directly, but maybe at a business level, when you're discussing marketing strategies or pricing strategies or promotion or whatever, right? And this is where our day-to-day consultation comes from. So, for example, according to a study by the Kellogg, it's actually known as Kellogg study, and the author, Susan Cain, articulates, and according to her research, it says that when you go into a meeting, generally 70% of the talking is done by three individuals. So, for example, if you have a meeting of 10 people, 70% of the talking is being dominated by
By three
30%
people.
of the time. What happens to the rest of the 70%? Do they not have anything to contribute? Do they not have anything to kind of put into the consultation process, whether it's your whatever decision making it is? Susan, like the research at that point says that there are a number of reasons why people may volunteer to give some information as needed. One of the reasons is, for example, because everyone has different tendencies of energy. Some people may be extroverted and they'll kind of volunteer the information straight away. Others, on the other hand, may have introverted kind of energy where they not only need to be prompted, but sometimes sending the meeting agenda 24 hours prior to that just helps people formulate their ideas. So this is a consultation. It's something that's encouraged not just in your big decisions in your life when it comes to what you need, should I go to the car, should I buy, etc. But it's something that's used within our businesses and strategies day in, day out, and it's trying to hone on the skills of those specific people that have the kind of traits that they can delve into further.
Definitely.
So that's very interesting. Okay, so it's not just in big, very important decisions in your life. It could be in your decisions, even very difficult decisions require many a times consultation. I think the essence of the whole discussion is, okay, let's confine our discussion when making important decisions in life. When moving countries, when looking for a spouse to marry, for example, or what to study, what field to enter into a business, and so on and so forth. All of these are major areas within our lives that we need consultation um, in regards to that we need consultation for. What's important is that, even though it's common sense, and I agree with you, even though it's common sense, Islam takes a step further and says there are adab, there are etiquettes, right? There are etiquettes for a person to seek consultation, and then there are etiquettes for the person who is consulted, right? فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask those who know if you not know. Always refer to the experience in the field. This is something that I'm not saying being transparent, but if you have no experience in whatever it is, plumbing, fishing, whatever it is, you naturally refer to
A
an
specialist.
experienced person in that
Yeah.
particular field. But essentially, Muhammad, my question for you is, how many people do you consult? It's an interesting discussion, right? How many people do you consult before making a decision? And this is what we do. Someone becomes sick. You go to a doctor. The doctor will try and find out what the problem is, what the illness is. Then you will naturally go to a second doctor, go to a third doctor, fourth doctor at that time, to try and understand what the sickness is. Is it the case where if I refer to more experienced people in the field, the better it is? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an interesting question. And just as a reminder, this is a live session, so viewers
Yeah,
are
please,
encouraged to
inshallah, get
definitely
involved.
comment on the live chat, but also message the number that's currently presented, or even call the number. So, Sheikh, the question that you kind of just started the discussion off is, how many is too many when it comes to consulting people? Or how many, when is it you draw the line? Um, this is something that is a contentious kind of question, because we live in an age where we might even say that we are paralyzed by the information that's available. And similarly, it can be said about the people. For example, if you kind of put the whole information part into the processes, a Google search just gives you tons and tons of information. And the same thing is where you draw the line when it comes to consultations. Here, in my past experience, I'll probably just stick to three. But that's me personal. It's not backed by any data as such. But my personal preference is, if I can find two or three kind of experts in a field, then I just stick to those. Too much information can just confuse you, but too little may just make it too niche. Well, what's the number that you usually would go for, or do you have any data that you could discuss?
Definitely. Through experience, the more people you refer back to, the more confusion it causes. And you end up being worse off than you were in the beginning.
Yeah.
So it's always, the best idea is always refer to two or three people maximum, and then make a decision based on what those two or three say. What do you think, Hassan?
I think the more people you ask, the more confusing it gets.
So,
You end up treading on people's toes. Like you said, you gave the example about the doctor. You go to one doctor, someone might prescribe paracetamol for you. You might go to another doctor, you might prescribe, cocodamol for you. You just don't know. Yeah, it's to treat the same illness,
yeah.
but there's possible different solutions. And from going to so many different people, I think you're just confused. And I would go to the most knowledgeable person. I think like if I had a spiritual problem, I'm sure I could come to you, Sheikh.
So that's something very important to keep in mind. So whenever we need to consult, number one, we refer to the experienced people in that particular field. Number two, we should limit how many people that we consult from. The more we consult, the more we seek consultation from more people, obviously the more confusion we end up getting into. So that's the adab for the person who is seeking consultation, right? What about the adab for the person who is giving consultation, the person who is sought consultation from?
Yeah.
Right? So it's interesting, and it's amazing how many a times many of these riwayat, they are famous. it touches on common sense, right? So I remember, for example, there was one narration where the Imam alayhi salam explains that the person was consulted, be trustworthy in your words, keep it confidential, keep it private. If this person is coming to you for help, then obviously it should be between you and him.
Yeah.
No one else should obviously come to find out that what his needs are, what his problems are. So that's one area where the person has to keep their discussions, the whole idea of the whole element of consultation private. The second is obviously there shouldn't be a conflict of interest in the sense that the person will come and seek consultation from someone who's working in a particular company, right? And he's asking for help. But because of conflict of interest, this person will try and feed him wrong information and hinder him or stagnate his progression in that particular field or in that company, right? To feed wrong information, to somehow sabotage his, I don't know, his promotion, so to speak, right? Um, the fact that this person has referred to you and sees that there is something in you that needs, that he values, and he obviously wants to seek consultation from you, is a ni'mah in itself. And obviously we have that responsibility to not tarnish that, to not take that for granted and hinder his growth. So even if there's a conflict of interest in you taking part in helping this person, providing consultation, providing advice, nasiha, and so on and so forth, if you see that there is a conflict of interest, then you should step back. And there's no harm in doing that. There's no harm in saying, look, even though I may be qualified to help you and give you advice, due to this current scenario, it's not the best way to move forward. And obviously, it's perfectly fine to step back and not take part. And there's no harm in it. There's no harm in it. Obviously, it safeguards your reputation and this person's reputation as well.
And this is the exact same point that Imam Sujad also makes in his Risalatul Huquq. I think one of the points he mentions is, firstly, you need to make sure you put all of your efforts in trying to kind of give him good advice, and advice that you would have done if you would have been in the same position. However, if you can't do that, then refer him to someone else, with the view that you acknowledge that you're not an expert, or you may not have all of the right answers, and you should then spare no efforts in trying to guide him.
So what about the idea of hastening and making a decision? That's a very interesting discussion, isn't it? I personally haven't done any research in this area with regards to what the Ahlul Bayt have to say.
Yeah.
But have you come across anything in regards to this about?
Yeah. So if I take simple examples, if I start small from our simple examples, everything in our society is going towards more and more hastiness, right? So, for example, our food has become fast food. Our coffees have become instant coffees. When we order something from eBay, Amazon, or whatever, we want our deliveries to come next day delivery. We'll just pay a little bit extra and get next day. Our sources of information, our knowledge has all become at the fingertip of our fingers, because all we need to go is Google these. And we kind of see this trend going, that as soon as we progress, the way the society is moving towards, it's going more and more towards hastiness. And if we look into the Holy Quran, for example, again, we see that the roots have been discussed. So, for example, there are so many ayats or verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers that man was created with a hasty temperament, or man was created of haste. خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ مِنْ عَجْلٍ, for example, which goes to the point that hastiness is somewhat in our innate nature. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we could argue, is kind of stating that, look, you as man are born out of hastiness. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوءًا. So what we need to do, for instance, is appreciate that, yeah, we have this tendency of going towards hastiness, but now how can I rein it back? Um, and it comes back to the same idea of consultations. If you take a moment, you just think, deliberate, then it just works out. For example, the Holy Prophet has been quoted to have said that hastiness or hasty decision making brings forth the destruction of the people. And if it is only if the people did their jobs properly, no one would annihilate. Uh, but then I'm sure some may argue that there have been traditions at the same time that say if there's a good thing that you've done, or if there's a good action that needs to be done, then do it quickly. For example, the Holy Prophet himself says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala admires the good act which is hastened to be performed. Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran again, chapter 3 says that as soon as you have decided, rely on Allah, referring that once you've decided, make good, quick decisions. So arguably, we could ask that, are these two traditions or verses of the Holy Quran not in contradiction to each other or in contrast to each other? But when you refer to the books, or when you kind of consult to the experts in the field of religion, they allude to saying that once the decision-making process has been done to establish that the outcome of so-and-so action will become good, then yeah, don't wait around, do it quickly. But in the decision-making process is when we should try and rein in our hastiness, as admonished and advised by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran.
So that's very interesting, very, very interesting how the Quran approaches the whole concept of hastening towards good deeds, but do not hasten in making decisions.
Yeah.
And taking your time, obviously weighing the pros and the cons, as you said, Hassan, and obviously consulting people, and then slowly making that decision. So in this whole discussion, obviously consultation is obviously one area of how to make effective decisions, how to make sound decisions that has khair in it for the people. The second area is istikhara. Istikhara is like the juicy subject that everyone wants to talk about. And unfortunately, half of the whole element of istikhara is misinterpreted, is misunderstood. And it's istikhara. When it comes to decision making, what I've realized in this whole research is that first and foremost, the human being should use his aql, it should use his intellect. Make a decision, weigh up the pros and the cons, research on that area. When you're not able to research on the area, if you don't have enough information, or you have enough information and you're still in that state of hayran, you're still confused, then you should go into consulting that person or consulting the experts in the field. And when you do consult people, 2 3 different people in the field, and you are still in the state of hayran, the state of confusion, then you should seek istikhara. Now, istikhara literally in the Arabic language means to seek what is best from God. Right? There are 2 options. You don't know which option to take, and obviously you want the better of the 2 options. Now, what you're saying is, Ya Allah, I don't know which one is better for me. I'm leaving that decision in your hands. You choose for me what is good for me. Istikhara literally means talabul khair. It means to seek what is best, right? And it's seen as the very last resort. And that's something, I've seen in the communities where people don't use it as a last resort. They use it as a first resort. And many a times it's often interpreted as a sign of religiosity. I have a decision that I need to make. Let me do istikhara. So you call up the Maulana and you say, Maulana, go istikhara. It's seen as the first resort. It's interpreted as a sign of religiosity when it's not. Istikhara is the very, very last resort that you need to take. People often, when they ask me for istikhara, I tell them, have you consulted? Have you weighed pros and the cons? Have you researched on the issue? And many times what happens is when you actually go through this entire process of making a decision, I would say that 95% of the time, you don't even need to do istikhara. Right? Istikhara, by the time you come to the area of istikhara, you already know where your heart is leaning towards. Istikhara literally is when your heart is, it's in the state of confusion. It can pull you to this direction or it can pull you to that direction. But many times, many of us, when there is a decision that needs to be made, our hearts are already pulling towards one side, right? It's not 50-50, it's more like 70-30, 60-40. And in that case, you know what the answer is. You should go with what your heart is telling you. And this whole concept of istikhara is something that has been um, quite active even in time of the Holy Prophet, even in time of the Aimma alayhi salam. Yeah? This is a very interesting hadith of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, which says that whenever he wanted to make a very big decision in his life, he would perform salah, right? He would recite the 2 rak'ah as-salah, a very specific namaz of istikhara. And after, he would recite this dua, and it's a very, very beautiful dua. And it's a dua, I'm just paraphrasing it. He says, Ya Allah, um, there is a decision that I need to make. Um, if it is good for me in dunya and akhirah, then allow me to perform it, or allow me to do it. If it's bad for me in dunya or akhirah, then keep it away from me. And that's the gist of that dua. Now, scholars, whenever they came towards the whole concept of istikhara, they said, okay, look, istikhara, there's two meanings to it, or there's two levels to it. The first meaning of istikhara is when you're seeking goodness from God. And this is a dua in itself, right? It's not the istikhara that we know. It's a dua where you're turning to God and you're saying to God, Ya Allah, give me what is good for me. Keep away from me what is not good for me. And that's a very beautiful dua. Obviously, there's in Al-Kafi, there are certain ahadith which says that when you're reciting Salat Tahajjud, for example, the last rak'ah of Salat al-Layl, a person should say, for example, 100 times, Astaghfirullah bi rahmatih. I'm seeking goodness from you through your mercy. And that's a dua in itself, where you're asking God, give me what is good for me. And if it's bad, then keep it away from me. Right? So that's the first level of istikhara. That's the first concept of istikhara, where you're seeking goodness from God. And that is seen as a dua. So before you go in to even performing istikhara the way we know it, there is a whole procedure that goes before it. And obviously, when a person performs this dua, it's like you're performing tawakkul on God. You're saying, look, I'm going to make this decision, but I want the goodness from it, from that decision that I make. I want the consequences to be good, right?
What I wanted to add on there as well, just when you were speaking, you mentioned in the hadith when the imam wanted to make a very big decision.
Yeah.
Right. So that alludes to the fact then do we only use istikhara then on these big decisions, or when we're talking about this topic of effective decision making, do we always ask for even trivial matters, people of knowledge, that what would you expect me to do in this situation or that situation? Because I was just thinking in my head right now, when we're doing that, then essentially we're blocking off our own reasoning and we're just relying on one other person to get our knowledge from, and then that stops us. We stagnate essentially. We're not doing anything extra. We're just relying on someone. Okay, let me ask him and see what he says. Let me ask him and see what he says. Like, what would you say about that?
Right. So it's a very interesting question. When you're seeking, okay, so when Imam Sajjad seeks istikhara for big decisions, yeah, it makes sense that you perform istikhara the way you perform istikhara for big decisions. But again, it depends on which type of istikhara you're talking about. If you're talking about dua, then even in the smallest and the trivial issues, you can seek goodness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's no issue in that, right? But when you have to resort to the istikhara that we know of, then limit that to big decisions. Limit that to very, very, big decisions in your life. You hear about stories where people tend to perform istikhara. There's two ways of performing istikhara, either through the tasbih, the subh, or through the Quran. And people abuse this. I've seen people in my life where they tend to abuse this, whether it is, for example, leaving a meeting early or not going to a meeting or eating a particular food, they'll perform istikhara on the most trivial, mundane, daily issues in one's life. Well, that's my opinion. Obviously, some scholars will tend to disagree with it, but I've seen this, and I don't tend to agree with it, where people perform istikhara for even the littlest of things. But when you're referring to istikhara as a dua, where you're saying, Ya Allah, give me what is good for me in the decisions that I make throughout my day, that's perfectly fine, even when it comes to the smallest of issues, because it's a dua at the end of the day, right? Dua is ibadah. It's interesting because there's a narrator one day, there's the person narrates this hadith. He comes towards Imam Sadiq alayhi salam and he says, how do I seek goodness from God? How do I perform istikhara? And the Imam teaches him the procedure of performing istikhara. And the Imam teaches him the method of performing istikhara through the Quran, that you open the Quran. Obviously, there's a dua, salah before it. You open the Quran, whatever the first verse is on the right page, right? If it's a good verse, if it talks about heaven, if it talks about paradise, if it talks about rewards, then obviously it's good. If it talks about adhab and hell and punishment and all of these things, then obviously it's bad. So the Imam taught this person how to perform istikhara. But then the person who was listening to this, he said to the Imam, he said, then, if I open the Quran and the verse comes out to be good, then isn't the Quran foreseeing the future for me? Right? Isn't the Quran telling me something that we essentially have no knowledge of? And the Imam said, no, it's not like that. Right? Istikhara is not that the Quran is now enrolling the future for you, exposing the future for you. Istikhara is choosing what is good for you. And there's a difference between that. Right? There's a difference between the Quran telling you your future and the Quran, or Allah through the Quran, is choosing what is best for you. So there's a difference. There's a world of a difference between the two. And it's interesting because, sometimes when people come and they perform istikhara, and usually what happens is they have negative consequences associated to it. A person will propose, they'll get engaged, the couple, they'll get married, they'll end up in a divorce. Before they get married, obviously they do istikhara, and the istikhara comes out to be good. A few years later, they end up in divorce. Hold on a second, the istikhara came out to be good. Why did this marriage, this relationship end up in a divorce? Because there was khair in it, right? Allah chose what was good for you, and it was good for you that you developed a relationship with this person. It didn't work out. It ended up in a divorce. There was goodness in it for you. You learned a lot from it. You matured from it. You learned many vital lessons that you will try and not repeat later on. It was a phase in your life that you had to go through before you began your next chapter in life, and that is good in itself, right? Yeah, the relationship didn't work out, which is bad, but that doesn't mean that the istikhara was essentially bad, right? It just means that you learned certain things.
Arguably, on that point, Sheikh, it could potentially also be said that, yes, it was in that context good for you to get married, but thereafter, the buck falls at you. You still have to put in the effort in the marriage. You can't just kind of hold your hand up saying, okay, this istikhara has come good, everything's going to be rosy. I'm sure essentially istikhara comes, but the rest is still up to you.
Right. So imagine a person who's performed istikhara and it turns out to be good. It doesn't mean that you're in heaven now. It doesn't mean that everything in your life based on that istikhara will turn out to be good, and every action that you make will be good. You want to start a business, istikhara came out to be good, you could go bankrupt, right? It doesn't mean that your business will start flourishing. Istikhara doesn't mean that you're now free of trials and tribulations. Imtihan is part and parcel of your life. Imtihan, bala, all of this is part of the life of a mu'min, especially the person who follows the message of the Holy Quran. And the Quran, makes it very, very clear to this in this regards, that a person will have trials and tribulations in his life. They will have afflictions in their lives. Istikhara, when it comes out to be good, it doesn't mean that you are now free from pain and suffering. Whereas pain and suffering is embedded in your life. It's a very it's the heart of refining you as a spiritual person, right? So that's something that we need to definitely keep in mind, that when a person performs istikhara, it turns out to be good, doesn't mean that everything else will turn out to be good as well as a consequence. And obviously the famous example of the divorce, or even when a person starts a business and he goes bankrupt, yeah, in that area of your life it didn't work out, the istikhara came out good, but because you learned a lot from it, right? There's a lot of vital life lessons that you learned from it. It matured you in a particular way, and you use that as a catalyst to not make that mistake again.
Um, At the start, you kind of mentioned how the istikhara is to be used only as a last resort, and potentially there are some that may kind of take istikhara to the extreme case where they use it trivially for the day-to-day decision making. Is there a time where it is arguably said that an istikhara is not valid, or rather at a time where istikhara is completely void?
Yeah, so the reason being is because, sometimes people will ask istikhara when it comes for halal or haram. Istikhara doesn't exist for halal and haram, or even when something is wajib for you. You do istikhara if you want to go for Hajj. Hajj is wajib on you. You have the financial capacity, you have the ability. When it becomes wajib, it becomes wajib. You can't do istikhara, oh, should I go for Hajj? I remember one of my friends, he kind of narrated to me a story where a person came to him and said, Sayyid, performing istikhara, I want to go for ziyarah. Is it the best time for me to go for ziyarah? Ziyarah is something which is highly recommended. If a person has the opportunity to go for ziyarah, you should take it. If you're worried about your job, if you're worried about all of these other things in life, through ziyarah, you could be safeguarded from all the trials and tribulations. So, he kind of replied to this person saying, go. You don't need to do istikhara in such an affair. Just do tawakkul on God and just go, and that's something really beautiful, because when you see during Arba'in, people last minute make decisions to just jump on the plane and go for the ziyarah, for the walk especially. So that's something very, very beautiful. So that's in the first area, when obviously when you're talking about haram and halal or wajib, there is no istikhara in these affairs. Usually the second area where istikhara is absolutely void is when deep down you know what decision you need to make, but then you kind of use istikhara as an excuse to justify that decision that you want to make. So imagine, for example, there's a couple, they met, they like each other. There's that click. Everyone looks for that click nowadays, right? So they click, and they like each other. The parents like, the boy and the girl. There's good atmosphere everywhere, and they want to get married together. And all of a sudden, someone comes up with the idea saying, oh, perform istikhara. We want to see if this is going to work out. They perform istikhara. Istikhara doesn't turn out to be good. It turns out to be bad. And the whole relationship is broken because of it. Like, hold on a second. This istikhara in itself, it's batil. Yeah, it's void, absolutely void. And you'd be surprised how many relationships break because of these types of istikhara, where, the couple really like each other. They are a perfect match. They ought to get married, but then istikhara comes out to be bad. Istikhara is batil, it's void. Because is that the heart is not in a state of confusion. You've already made your decision deep down, right? Now, act on that decision, act on those feelings, and that's perfectly fine. And there's barakah. You don't need istikhara at this area. So these are usually the two areas where istikhara is void and it's batil. Yeah, that's what comes to mind.
But then coming to that point that you're just saying about istikhara, what I was just thinking of is you said that the Imam taught somebody how to do the istikhara. Yeah. So that brings the question, can you do your own istikhara? I mean, do you have to go to a sheikh essentially? Do I have to come to you to get an istikhara, or can I learn it myself and do it?
Yeah, you can learn it yourself and you can act on it yourself as well. You'll be surprised how many applications we have on istikhara, you turn on the application, you press the button, you tap the screen, and then it randomly comes up with a verse. And then it tells you if the verse is a positive verse or a negative verse. Obviously, I'm not inclined to use such applications, but you'd be surprised how forward we've become as a community.
So like a raffle ticket, yeah? hit the jackpot or not.
So, yeah. Yeah, we should.
Yeah. I think we've come to our time, brothers and sisters. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you took something out of this, especially on the istikhara bit, and gained something. I mean, I think I've definitely gained something from this. Consult one another. Definitely that really hit home. But inshallah, thank you so much. Do you guys want to end with anything before we go?
Well, thank you for joining in. And Really, I'll leave it at that.
Jazakallah, everybody. We shall see you. Khuda Hafiz. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.